enjoyed the delicious breakfast. Can we just give a round of applause to them? They're not here, but I think it's one of the best breakfasts we've ever had. And unfortunately, I didn't get to taste it yesterday because someone else had a tasting. But anyway, I think it's as good as it was informed to us. So thanks very much, Rick, and to the team. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct honor to introduce a distinguished leader in diplomacy, Ms. Nitha Bhushan, the High Commissioner of India to New Zealand. A seasoned diplomat with career spanning over 3 decades, Ms. Nitha Bhushan has been a formidable presence in the Indian Foreign Services since 1994. Her extensive experience includes pivotal roles across the globe, from Japan to Germany, a significant contribution to economic development partnerships between India and other nations. Ms. Bhushan's academic background is as impressive as her professional journey. An economic honors graduate from Hindu College, from the North Campus, can I add to all those from Delhi and from South Campus, and also holds an MPhil degree from Madras University with research thesis on World Trade Organization past, present, and future challenges. Her expertise in economic affairs is not just theoretical, but practical, having served as Director in Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance in India, where she oversaw bilateral relationships with Europe. And we know, with India having now been a closer working relationship with Europe, there is hopefully expectancy in New Zealand-India relations. No pressure, madam. As we stand here in West Auckland, a hub of innovation and export, it is fitting that we welcome a speaker who embodies the spirit of global trade and cooperation. Under her leadership, the High Commission has fostered initiatives like Make in India, propelling India towards becoming a global manufacturing hub. This initiative aligns perfectly with the aspirations of our local exporters here in West Auckland, seeking to expand their horizon and forge new partnerships. Ms. Bhushan's tenure has been marked by a commitment to transforming red tape into red carpet, simplifying business process and enhancing India's standing in the ease of doing business. Her efforts have not gone unnoticed, with significant increase in foreign direct investment flows in India, even amidst global challenges. And I have a post on my LinkedIn for tonight, so make sure you watch it. As we eagerly anticipate her insights, let us reflect on the potential of our shared goals and promise of strengthening ties between India and New Zealand. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to a visionary leader, a catalyst for change, and our esteemed guest, Ms. Nitha Bhushan.
Many thanks, Sunil ji, for that very, very warm and kind introduction. Dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, friends, kia ora, namaste, and good morning. It is a great pleasure to be here amidst all of you this morning. And I'm truly humbled and touched by such a fantastic presence early in the morning. And it shows a lot affection you have for India and the belief that you have in the growing partnership between India and New Zealand. Let me start with some acknowledgements of the dignitaries present here. Honorable Cameron Brewer, Member of Parliament, Mr. Michael Bowell, Chair of Central Park Henderson Business Association, Mr. Tim Livingston, Treasurer, Mr. Jamie Pickford, Senior Manager of BNZ, Mr. Mahesh Bhidraji, former Member of Parliament, Mr. Chandan Obriji, CEO of Duco Consultancy, Ms. Paula Seymour, General Manager of Vitagrey Indian Association, Ms. Amanda Cassidy, General Manager Marketing of the Trusts, Mr. Jimmy Taylor, General Manager West City Auto Group, of course Sunil Kaushalji, President of Vitagrey Indian Association, and Mr. Venkat Raman ji, Editor of Newslink. So we have such a wide span of people from various walks of life, and it's a truly daunting task for me to share my perspectives on India and the way India-New Zealand relations are growing and shaping up as of now. Let me give you a little bit of a brief perspective on how India, what is happening in India at the moment. As you know, India is the largest democracy in the world. We are the most populous country. In a week's time, about 970 million Indians who are eligible to vote will cast their ballot to choose the next government of India. So we are in the middle of our national elections. We have a 5-year cycle, and the elections will happen in 6 or 7 phases over a period of 6 weeks, starting from April 19th to 1st of June, and then the results will be collated and declared on 4th of June. So this will give you a glimpse of the kind of exercise that is going on in India, and the fact is that this is the largest democratic exercise of its kind anywhere in the world. Having said that, as you all know, India is now the 5th largest economy in the world. In a complex and challenging world, India continues to grow at 7 to 8%. Which is, something very special, because if you compare to many parts of the world which are facing recession, and you wonder how India has managed to grow, and that, there is no secret, I would say, but that is due to a few things that the government did and a few developments that happened. India's growth is basically managed by the people of India, and by that I mean that the domestic demand in India, the domestic savings and the investments levels have been very high. I mean, as you know, I am an economic graduate, so maybe some of these terms will be there. Riding on very high levels of domestic demand and investments by people themselves, and of course the belief from companies across the world of India's growth and the potential led to a large amount of, in fact, record number of foreign direct investment in the last couple of years especially. It has been going on for nearly 20 years, but the last 1 decade has been truly special because the government has tried very hard to improve the ease of doing business. Many people earlier said that, India, there'll be bureaucracy and you can't get this done. But the government scrapped over 1,500 laws and regulations. It introduced a series of reforms. Most of the investments are in the automatic route in India, and many sectors which were not earlier opened have now been opened for foreign direct investment. So this led to the fact, and added to this is the fact that India itself is a huge market. We have a growing middle class of maybe 500 to 600 million people. So you can imagine the kind of market we are talking about, and every day more people are entering that market. So, just to give you a small glimpse, let me mention about one company, Mercedes-Benz. Everybody knows that. They invested in India about 20 years ago and set up a assembly plant first. Now they have, they have a full-fledged R&D and manufacturing unit. And at that time, I don't know how many cars they sold, but they started small. And last year they sold about 60,000 cars to Indians. And each car was priced at over $80,000 to $100,000. So you can imagine the demand that is being created in India today, to tell you very honestly. And this is also reflected in a few of the other developments which I would like to share with you. Over the last few years, the government has given a huge push to infrastructure development, development of highways, ports, roads, civil aviation, etc. You all know that Air India, which till some time ago was owned by the public sector unit, owned by Government of India, is now been sold to Tatas, and Tatas are the owners. They put in, I think, a demand, purchasing demand of over 220 aircrafts to Boeing. Keeping in mind, these will be delivered over the next 2 to 3 years, but they kept in mind the growing sector. The number of airports have increased. Even smaller cities in India have an airport now and can easily be accessed. If you go to India, you will see the transformation for yourself. In fact, one of my colleagues in MFAT was telling me that he visited India with one of the delegations a couple of months ago and wanted to see Agra, Taj Mahal in Agra, and I was amazed at the highway that has been created from Delhi to Agra. And he said that, I wish, we can do it, we can replicate it here as well. So there was a sense of optimism on that our friends feel when they go to India. And let me, as you heard, that I have been in the Foreign Service for nearly 3 decades. I will complete 30 years in September this year. And over my own journey in the service, we've seen so many changes. And it has been a personal journey, I would say, for me, because when I joined the Foreign Service, the India that we represented and the India that is now has seen a huge sea change. India's growth and India's perspectives are rooted in our ancient civilizational ethos. And I will come back to this point a little later and tell you a little bit about how India is viewing the geopolitical situation as well. But talking about the development and the growth and the economy of India, many people felt earlier that in India it would, nothing is possible unless you pay here and you pay there and you get these licenses. But the present government has made it so simple that everything is now on a automatic route, and the transition has been very, very smooth to a very digital system being in place. 20 years ago, the IT revolution came to India, and everything sort of boomed, and India became the largest exporter of services, especially IT services. And India was called the back office of the world. In fact, most of the companies, the big companies across the world, set up their call centers in India at that time. And they even taught the people who worked at these call centers to speak, say, in the American accent, so that the customer who's calling does not know where this call center is. But now people say with pride, we have 3 centers in India, we have 5 centers, we have 2 centers, and we are going to open 1 more center, because the world has recognized the power of the Indian workforce, the skills, the talent. The Indian education system is something I would like to touch upon. We have some of the best institutions in the world, the Indian Institutes of Technology, the IIMs, the Institutes of Management, and a score, thousands of good engineering and science, universities teaching science, economics, arts. And this is reflected in the fact that for every seat in a premier institute, there are thousands of applicants. And this generates a very big, I would say, healthy competition. And I feel personally that competition is not bad, because each student is forced to give his very best, work that much harder if he wants that seat. So the best people, the best minds come together, and then that is when the real change in the mindset and the transformation happens. From that call center stage, now over the last 10 years particularly, India has become the pharmacy of the world. More than 60% of vaccines come from India to all over the world, even to New Zealand. To New Zealand, the medicines, more than 60% of medicines are from India. And it is growing, and it is possible because you saw during COVID, when many countries were grappling with vaccines, availability of medicines, antibiotics, India was able to produce not just for its own people, but for the rest of the world as such. We sent vaccines and medicines to over 150 countries across the globe. So it would not be wrong to say that India is the pharmacy of the world. India is also now the scientific and technological powerhouse, with many countries across the globe setting up their research and development centers in India. Earlier, a lot of these technologies were sort of imported, say the 4G technology, 5G, but now the next generation technologies are already being developed in India. Bangalore is one place where a lot of these collaborations are happening, and companies like well-known Nokia is working with Wipro, and similarly companies from Europe, rest of the world, America, are coming and working with India. And the meeting of minds from all parts of the world makes sure that India is able to produce some of the best and most advanced technologies. Friends, I would also like to say that now India is a powerhouse in terms of space technology. You all know about the moon mission, Chandrayaan-3, which was launched, and it was a very successful mission. Following that, there was a sun mission called Aditya L1 mission, and now India is working on Chandrayaan-4, the moon mission, and astronauts are already selected who will travel to moon in 2040, I think, because that is the time we have aimed to send a manned mission to the moon. And most of India's technology in the space sector is indigenously developed at the Indian Space Research Organization, and institutes like IITs and Indian Institute of Science have such a lot of talent that a lot of it is indigenously developed. And that makes India again a very special country, because the focus on science and technology has been immense by the present government as well, and we have made very ambitious plans. It was not just landing on the moon, it was landing on a very difficult part of the moon, the south, near the South Pole. So we are taking up the most difficult of tasks, and our scientists are, reaching there. So that is something as an Indian we were very, feel very proud to say. But at the same time, collaboration is something we have been promoting, and you know about the New Zealand company Recon, which contributed chips to India's moon mission and is contributing many more chips and other technology to India's other space missions. You are all aware that India launches hundreds of satellites for other countries. And that is possible because of the belief and the faith in the Indian system. And India has been launching satellites for US, Finland, France, Germany, any country, because it is much cheaper to do it from India. The costs are much less, and in fact even our missions are at a much lower price than other parts of the world. In fact, the joke is that when Hollywood makes a movie, maybe that on moon or space, that costs more than the actual mission that India carries out. So now, over the last, I think, about 10 years, when India has become a truly manufacturing hub. I mentioned about Mercedes, but during the last 7-8 years, a number of countries have established bases in India. Excuse me. So, what I have seen is that countries are finding a lot of value in setting up. Thank you so much. Countries are finding a lot of value in setting up a manufacturing unit in India. It is, thank you. Thank you so much. It is much easier to set up a base in India and export to countries, near India. Of course, the demand, most of the manufacturing that is done in India is consumed in India because we have such a huge market. But when you make in India, you can easily export to countries in the, in West Asia, Africa, parts of Europe, and so on. And last year, for example, the smartphones, I think the export was over 10 billion US dollars from India to rest of the world. So I'm not talking about the consumption in India, but the export figures were so huge. And I also heard the CEO of Apple in India saying that out of every 7 Apple iPhones, 1 is now made in India. So we have now become a very reliable partner in the supply chains as well. Supply chains of mobile phones, of automotive products, electronic goods, and so on. I spoke about research and development. The CEO of Mercedes India was speaking to one of the business channels, and he was saying that any Mercedes bought anywhere in the world has an Indian component. Either an Indian engineer or an Indian designer has worked on it, or somebody has done something to make that Mercedes what it is today. So this is the strength and the power of India. Let me give you a little bit of a brief perspective on how India sees the world and the evolving and the complex situation that is going on. One of the things I would like to say is that India has always advocated for peace, dialogue and diplomacy in a complex and a very complicated and a conflict-ridden world. But we have always stood for that and we have advocated for that. It has been imperative for India to speak for democracy, rule of law, human rights and a rules-based international order. As you all know that the world is going through a number of conflicts at the moment, but we have consistently engaged with all major powers to ensure, to put across this voice that there should be dialogue, there should be diplomacy, that it should be given a chance. And at the same time, we have stood for any humanitarian crisis and any situation like that. When such conflicts happen, one of the first things that we in our Foreign Ministry of External Affairs have to face is the evacuation of Indian nationals from that area. So when the Ukraine conflict happened, you know that probably that more than 20,000 Indian students were based in Ukraine. They were studying various degrees of engineering, medicine and so on, and they had to be evacuated. The government started its Operation Ganga, and it went on for about 10 to 15 days, and each and every Indian student was evacuated through our Air India or Air Force flights. And I think except for one student, everybody came back safe. And similar initiatives were taken during conflicts in Sudan, Yemen, and in the Israel and Palestine. So I would like to say that India really values its diaspora, and what we have seen in New Zealand is that we have a very vibrant, a very strong diaspora, and they have played a very important part in the economy and society of New Zealand. And I want to say that we really respect that, and it's a remarkable diaspora which plays such a vital role in bringing our two countries together. Friends, let me speak a little bit on our bilateral relations. I can assure you that the outlook at the moment is extremely positive. We have already seen that India has been, in the news. Both governments have said that we need to engage more with India. The Indian government has also indicated its willingness and commitment to engage with New Zealand in a very big way. And we see this happening on the ground at the moment. From the High Commission, I can assure you that we have a large number of visits planned in the coming months. Already the Deputy Prime Minister and the Trade Minister have gone to India and have had very successful meetings and discussions in India. Now we are working on a number of high-level visits. In fact, later this month, I have 2 high-level dignitaries likely to come for discussions on business and so on. And in the coming months, we are hopeful that exchanges will take place at very high levels once the elections are over in India. So things are looking very good, very positive. There's no doubt that our relations at the moment, especially the business part, is much below potential. But the attention and the focus, I am quite hopeful, will take us to our rightful place in this field. What both governments have agreed, and as you know, that we are trying to have a very broad-based relationship, not just focused on trade or business. That would be a narrow focus, but what both countries are trying to do is to have a relationship across sectors, at the highest political levels, at science and technological level. You know that there is a New Zealand center at IIT Delhi where researchers from both India and New Zealand work together on some projects, especially related to climate change and renewable energy. Tourism has come up as a big subject. I was told by some colleagues here in New Zealand, filming groups are here and they are spending millions of dollars filming here. The facilities here are excellent. Of course, the beauty of New Zealand is amazing, and so There is a group which is filming a series, a web series also, or a film, I'm not sure what exactly, but it's a South Indian movie, and I heard that they have already spent 10 to 20 million dollars in the South Island. I am not sure how true it is, but how some of the friends told me. The hotels are telling me that we are full of Indian tourists and people wanting to come and see New Zealand, and similarly in the Indian High Commission, I can assure you that the number of visas that we are issuing to our Kiwi friends are increasing at a very rapid pace. In fact, both the Indian diaspora has increased and the interest in India has come to a high level, and it's so much so that we are issuing up to more than 50 visas per day, in addition to e-visas which are done by our ministry. So many people go through the e-visa and many come to us. So we are issuing a large number of visas. People have shown so much interest in visiting India, and my advice to all businesses is that you must go to India, see for yourself. A business with India is like a very long-term relationship. You must invest that amount of time and energy and see for yourself, choose the partners and then go forward. So friends, it's a real honor to be here and share some perspectives with you. I'm truly delighted, and I'm really amazed at so many of you turning up early in the morning. Thank you very much for that. It's also very exciting times for our partnership, and we are all very excited about the coming months and what will happen, and I hope to keep on sharing views and perspectives as and when possible. Thank you very much.
That was extremely insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have a few minutes available to us. I would just ask that you keep your questions brief.